It's working. Yay.
Got
Da-da-da.
it.
We are now streaming. Hello, everybody. Hey,
Hello.
Facebook group.
Hey,
Hey,
guys.
Julie. Julie, how are you doing today?
I am good. I'm broadcasting from Huntington, Indiana, and I'm very grateful to be here. It's a cool place.
I am so stoked. Yay. And I know you just
And
got back to New York.
I did go
So,
to New York City, which was very
yeah.
different than Huntington, Indiana,
Yes, it is.
which, um,
I am. Hold on. I'm just pulling up just to see if this is working. So,
okay.
y'all.
Yeah, I know.
We're
I-
working. Okay.
We're working? Okay. Well, today we're going to flip the tables. We're going to turn the tables a little bit, and Julie is going to be doing the interviewing because Marissa went out and did a big, hairy, audacious thing, which we're all very, very proud of. Congratulations. I mean,
Thank you.
holy shit. What you did is amazing. She practices what she preaches, you guys, and that's very, very important for someone to go out there, do the big hairy thing, and do it really well, and keep a sense of humor. And it's just an honor to sit here and ask you some questions and hear about your big hairy thing. Um,
Yeah, I
for
have
those of
stories.
us, yeah, I know you do. For those of us that may have just joined, and I'm Julie Bates, and this is Marissa Axel, and she has the founder of Axon Fitness and Coaching. She's an amazing athlete and just went off to Manchester, UK to compete in the UCI Track World Masters Championship. It's not for pros, it's for amateurs. And let me tell you, most of them are ex-pros, just to
Yeah.
set the level of competition. It's no joke, and it's a fabulous, amazing thing to attend. And we want to hear how it went for Marissa. So I want to actually just kind of lay the groundwork on how track racing works, because it's a bit different than a lot of other cycling um, competition. Did you compete in only one event, or did you compete in a lot of events? And how did that work? If there were a lot of events, do they just collect points, or how does it all work?
Yeah, so good questions. Starting at the beginning, track racing, if you can envision, a track is generally indoors. Sometimes they're outdoors, but generally the racing tracks that we race on are indoors. They are 250 meters around on the black line, which is the shortest distance around the track. And I say that because they're about 7 meters wide. And then on a track like that, they are banked. So as you go around the corner, they're banked at about 46 degrees. So if you're riding at the top, like 21 feet up, you're 2 stories in the air if you're up on the railing. And then if you're down on the black line in what we call the sprinter's lane, you're going the shortest distance around the track, and you're slightly banked off the apron, but just barely. So just giving you an idea of the track. And then you're indoors, so it's hot. All of the tracks that are what deemed World Cup tracks are wood. They're made out of a Siberian pine. It's specifically regulated to the nth degree of how it is built and how it is inside, because of course it's wood. So if wood gets too hot or too cold, it expands and contracts. So it has to be a certain temperature and a certain humidity inside the track. So I'm sure that's more than you ever cared to know about. People are riding on these tracks on track bikes. So there are specific bikes that have 1 gear and 0 brakes. So it's important to know the skills of, well, how do I stop if I don't have brakes, right? What happens if there's a crash? What do I do if I don't have brakes? So there's a lot of skill involved in track riding and then track racing. So first you learn to ride, then you learn to race. So that is kind of setting the scene. And the other thing I like to say, I told my coach every time I walked into the track, it was like walking into somebody's mouth, right? Because you've got 400 people there, like breathing really hard. It's indoors. And yes, they have HVAC, but it still is like really humid and kind of smelly. Not as gross as like a men's locker room, but it was definitely like gross, you know? So there were points where I was like, this is physically grossing me out, but also after about 10 minutes, you forget about it and you just ride. So getting that being said, track racing in Masters Worlds, there's mass start races where you start with a group. So those are the scratch race, which is the basic race. The first person across the finish line first wins. Sounds like a race, right? And then there's the points race, which is a series of one race. Every 10 laps, there's a sprint for points. And in our race specifically, there was only 40 laps. So 3 sprints and then the final sprint. And the final sprint is worth double points. So it matters the most. So 4 sprints in a points race, and the person with the most points wins. So it's not necessarily a person who crosses the finish line first. There's a lot of different tactics. Yes, of course, if you win every sprint, you're going to win. But so there's tactics. It's literally you're doing math while you're breathing hard and trying to race. And you have to pay attention to like who's on what number, right? So it's a little challenging, and your brain is working overtime. And then there's individual races, which are the individual races, and then there are sprints where you're sprinting against one other person. I do not do sprints. They're beyond my pay grade. They're very hard for an endurance person like myself to understand how to get full sprinting like effort all at once. It's beyond me. And I'm like a trainer, I'm a coach, I'm a personal trainer. I physically and logically understand, but physically doing it, does not compute. So I have done sprints. I did them in nationals a couple years ago, and it was not for me. So, but I did the individual pursuit, which is, even though I love mass starts, that's really close to my heart. I don't know why I love it so much, but it is 2K or 2,000 meters, just as hard as fast as you can go. But you think like, okay, it's just like who can exercise the hardest, but there is so much technique involved and aerodynamics involved and the equipment involved. And then the fact that you have to ride on an indoor track to understand the nuances of all of that is exceptionally complex. So that was exciting. And then the 500 time trial, which is basically a sprint, 2 laps of the track as fast as you can go from a dead stop. So yeah, those are the 4 that I did. And I would say like it was done over 8 days. I think Saturday to Sunday. Yeah. So 8 days of racing. And so there's 500 people around the world coming to the race, and we're all age groups from 35 to 39 all the way up to 80 plus. So tons of age groups happening all different times of the day. And it's 2 sessions, usually like a morning session and an afternoon or evening session. So there was a time where I was racing at like 9 o'clock at night. Kind of annoying, but it is what it is. So that is setting the stage for like how big it was. Yeah.
Wow. Holy moly. That's a lot of athletes. And how would you know what a men's locker room smells like? Maybe that's for a different coffee with coaches.
I was on the swim team. I'm aware of these things.
Oh God. How long did you specifically train for this gigantic event?
Yeah, so I feel like it was born in my brain about 2 years ago. And so when I have people asking me as a coach, like, goals are scary, I don't know what to do. I think when you're coming into a big, hairy-ass goal, like you put some time and energy into thinking about what you want to do. And for me, it was a 2-year endeavor. So from the time I decided to myself that I wanted to do it to the time I stated to somebody else that I was going to do it. And I know how scary it is to say like, I want to go to Worlds. People look at you like, you, like, are you sure? And I was like, yeah, I want to do it. So 2 years ago, I made that decision. And then it's like getting over it in your brain. It takes a while to settle and think about and say like, I am an athlete who's going to Worlds. So you kind of start thinking about yourself in a little different way. So 2 years ago was when it started. I'd say I probably was able to say it like a year ago because Worlds was happening in LA last year and I couldn't go because I had plans that I had already made. So I couldn't go to it. And I had all the FOMO. I was super bummed, but all the same, it was, when it's in the US, it's primarily US riders who race it and less international people can come because of all sorts of political reasons. It's hard to get a visa. It's hard to get to the United States. It's expensive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So I just further was like, I really want to go next year, which was now. So I started thinking goal wise, yes. And then I shared with my coach, like, I really want to go to this. and you take like a 12 or 18 month perspective on how do you arrive at the very best that you can be. So we started, breaking it down from a year, 18 months into chunks where you start focusing on endurance. And it just happened that I got to also go do Tour of Flanders and Paris-Roubaix when it came to getting your endurance up and doing these big events, also in a big environment. So while they weren't races, they were still like really big events. And that was in itself a big thing. And then kind of just breaking it down from there into what important attributes do all of these races need? Like, what do you need to train? So, and then it's like training the skills within all of those trainings. So it was a 18-month process of breaking down how, like, the skills necessary, physiological skills, and then physical bike handling skills. And then, as you get closer and closer, you start to question your life choices. Why am I doing this? This is so much work. And at a certain point, it really feels selfish, right? I'm taking time off of work. I'm taking time away from my friends. I'm taking time away from my husband, or I'm dragging my husband to things he doesn't want to do because I want to do this big event. And so, so it was, really like the last 6 months, I would say, was just kind of, I think of it as like very general training, but then you're getting more and more and more and more and more specific. It culminated in a lot of different things. I did a race series in June or July. Don't remember which, I think it was June, where I had to suck it up and travel, in terrible traffic down to the San Jose track every Friday and raced really hard for practicing to get towards what was initially towards nationals. And then, so that it was, fine-tuning your sprinting, fine-tuning your points race ability, fine-tuning the scratch race, fine-tuning your 2K and the physiological benefits that you need there. And then driving myself to nationals. That was my first elite nationals I've ever been to. It was a huge event. But that event in July was in LA at the Carson Velodrome. Where I got to see Maddie. And doing that event was equal parts terrifying because some of the women there are world champions of the real world, not just Masters world. And you're like lining up right next to them, right? So it was, I shouldn't say terrifying, but you're just like, the gravity of the situation is real. Like, you don't want to be the reason these people fall down. You don't want to mess it up. And also you want to show up and be your best self. And at that point, I had been training specifically not for that long, like maybe a month, maybe 2 months. And so I was fit, but I wasn't like at the pinnacle. And you're going to a big event where a lot of people are at their best. So it was definitely humbling in terms of the outcome. But this is where I talk as a coach, like, you can have all like the goals of winning or outcome goals that you want, but really what matters is the process. And the process in this scenario was get time on the track, learn how to do better starts, right? Because you're starting on a big gear from a stop in a contraption that's holding you up, and they let you go like on 3, 2, 1, go. It just lets you go. And you have to make sure that you go forwards and not off to the side or fall down or have another mechanical. So it's like the spotlight is on the effort. And so you have to rise to the occasion. And I think that for me, nationals was a big dress rehearsal, remembering how hard it is to do a big event and the intensity around that event and the, I don't like cachet, but like everyone's there, everyone's high energy, there's stress. And like, you have to remember how to handle that for yourself as an athlete in order to perform. So I put myself in that situation, not because I thought I was going to win, far from it, but I needed that high stress situation. I needed that under my belt this year to remember how that works. And then fast forward, I did great. I set a PR. I was really happy with how the race went. I think I was 6th out of 7 or 7th out of 8, something like that. And then fast forward, 2 weeks before I left for Worlds, I drove down to LA, drug my husband with me, and we did a 4-day DIY track training camp which was one of the hardest training camps I've ever done in my life. So, it involved, I got to ride with the folks down there on a Thursday night training session, which was so fun. I wanted to just keep going, but I was like, you have to work hard tomorrow. So tamper down the efforts. And then Friday, getting there super early after being there late Thursday night. So learning how it is to race after not very much sleep, and then try to replicate those efforts and honing the skills. So anyways, so that was 2 weeks before I left. So I'm leaving home, doing 4 days, coming back, and just that anticipation is growing. And at that point I was really questioning, like, what am I doing? Do I really want to do this? And at that point, it's almost too late to back out, because I had my tickets, I had already signed up, but I did have a moment when I signed up and then Googled all the women I'm racing. And I was like, what have I done? What have I done? Oh my God. All of these people. So yeah, that was a lot.
Yeah, holy moly. That's a hair-raising journey to just psychologically to go through what you went through to prepare yourself for this big, hairy, audacious goal. Thank you for sharing that with us, because it's hard. It's mentally hard. It's physically challenging. Everything about focusing on a goal is hard, especially one that's so big. So thank you for being honest about the good and the bad and the ugly of it.
Oh yeah.
I also wanted to know, I mean, we are coaches. We coach a really fantastic training program for women. And did you incorporate the basics of our training program within the scope of your more specific training program for your big, audacious, hairy goal?
100% from start to finish. Yeah. So
Cool.
I train the way that I train the way that I train my clients. And so a normal week that I can just share, like Monday is a recovery day for the most part, unless, so Monday is a recovery day where I definitely get in a couple of walks and some yoga or stretching. Tuesdays were, let me think here. So for the most part, Tuesdays were lifting days, and then I would immediately get on the bike and do some sort of interval. Some of you are familiar with that. I did a ton of cadence drills where I'm teaching my body to get more efficient at a faster leg speed. And Julie, remind me to tell you a story about that at the end, because it's important. It's very relevant. So cadence drills, cadence drills, cadence drills. Then, or I was out doing cadence drills with some threshold. So you guys are familiar with that after lifting. So I have people like, my legs hurt so bad, I can't get on the bike. I was like, girl, I'm right there with you. It hurts. It's hard, but I know that it works, and I've seen it work in real life, not just for me, but for other clients as well. So that was Tuesday. Wednesday, I'm going to be out there doing some sort of high intensity interval, whether that's uphill, or it's, so it could be threshold, it could be VO2 breathless, it could be a mixture of all of these things. It just depended on where I was and what in this season. Some of the things I was doing was a lot of surge intervals. You guys have seen those where I'm riding uphill. Every minute I stand up and sprint, right? So we do a lot of those lactate buffering drills. I was doing those too. Thursday, back into the weight room, doing my strength training, back on the bike, doing some sort of cadence drills or easy pedaling, just to help get the soreness and decrease the delayed onset muscle soreness, or DOMS that people talk about. Fridays are typically a rest day. In that scenario, Saturday would have been a long ass ride with friends, and trying to keep, for the most part, generally down in that zone 2 realm, but sometimes training needed, I would do some intervals on the back end of that, whether it was like a threshold interval, for example. And then Sundays, it just depended on the week. Sometimes it was another endurance ride. Sometimes it was a high intensity interval ride. It just depended on what that was. And then go back to Monday recovery. So when I got really close to the workouts, to the training, when I was getting really specific, it changed a little bit, and I'll share what that was. It was like, I really got to a point where I'm like, how am I going to fit in all of my strength training? So I actually moved, and you're going to laugh at me, but I did a lot of thinking of my recovery days as 24-hour periods rather than day. So Monday morning I would lift, and then Monday to Tuesday I had a break. So that was recovery. Tuesday night was a hard, fast effort with a big, fast group ride here. And I needed that for that speed and intensity for racing with the big girls. Tuesday night, right? Wednesday would have been a more specific kind of cycling drill. Does that make sense? So it could have been like surge drills. More likely it was more of a recovery endurance type of drill sort of thing. Thursday, I would get back early and do strength training so that I had a whole day in between to rest. In between them Friday afternoons, I was doing I would say like my tester intervals. I did them every Friday at happy hour. So they were basically hill repetitions where I'm working 3, 4, 5-minute intervals at the hardest I could do. And I would just suffer as hard as I could, trying to get to that 300, 310, 315 watts, just trying to get up and up and up and up. So after those on Fridays, I was usually pretty wrecked on Saturdays, but that Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 3-day, 3-block, Saturdays I'd be at the track, or Sundays I'd be at the track. So I hope that kind of helps everyone have a clear idea, but sometimes my recovery days were split in the middle of 2 days.
Wow, that's a cool way of doing it. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. With all of this said, what was the hardest part about the trip while you were out there? What was your biggest obstacle?
Where do you start? I'll say, so, I mean, traveling was easy peasy. I mean, jet lag is always hard. So I got there really early in an effort to have my first day be like the best, like I'll be feeling the best. But unfortunately, I got kind of a sinus infection. So that was probably a huge obstacle that really affected my mental and physical ability to race. And so that was maybe like the biggest adversity, but I would say maybe almost equal to that was losing my phone on the tram in Manchester, where I don't know if you guys know, but like my whole life is on the phone, right? I run my business from my phone. Anyway, so that was a huge stressor that I didn't need to have. And that was, that added on just that additional stress. But what happened was on that day, the day that I lost it was the first day of my big race. I just had to like put the blinders on and be like, I can deal with this after everything is over. So I focused on what I could control. I couldn't control that I had a sinus infection. Couldn't control that my phone was gone, but I could control like how I warmed up. I could control my starts, so it was really just shut down everything else, put the blinders on and focus on what you know how to do. Yeah. And then I'd say maybe a distant third, but definitely a huge obstacle was having never ridden or raced on that track before. So I was at a bit of a disadvantage relative to a lot of my competition because they all live there. They've ridden that track a bunch of times. So they know how fast it is. They know what gear to ride. They know exactly what they're doing. And for me, it was a first. I had no idea. So that was an obstacle that affected the outcome of my races quite a bit until I, did what I could. Basically, when you have that obstacle, you do what you can to like get over it, which was a lot of investigating, looking around. What are people riding? How are they doing this? What kind of gear are they putting on their bike? And asking them, what gear were you riding in that race? And really like doing a lot of research around things I can control. And so those were, I would say, the 3 biggest things that happened on that day. And I did want to say like the woman who won my race on that day, the 2K, I immediately, when I had signed up for it, she was the first name I looked up, just like she was first in the list. And I was like, oh, she won worlds this year, like world champions, the World Masters Road Championship time trial. So I was like, okay, she's good. And then I looked further down the race results and like she got, top 10 in her country, elite, not age group, but elite in both the road race and the time trial. And so I was like, okay, she's probably a former pro. And yeah, she broke the world record in my race, which fun side note, the world record was my old teammate's record, Molly Van Howling, if you're out there. Hey, Molly. She broke your record. And so the fun part with my coach afterwards, we did the math to kind of back into like, what gear was she riding? And it was so big. So it was really fascinating. The thing with track is that it is really comes down to math, like how many teeth you have on your gear. You can physically measure, okay, well, how many inches every time that pedal goes around, how many inches do they go forward? And and then if you're doing that 90 or 100 or 120 times a minute, like how fast are they going? And you can physically measure that just doing math. So we've backed into like, oh, she was on a huge gear. So that was just really illuminating. But 3 huge things that happened, and you can't control them happening necessarily, but you can control how you deal with them.
Absolutely. So besides being proud of your placement of 2nd place in the world, I just wanted to point out to everyone who may not know that. What else are you proud of from this whole experience? What can you walk away and be proud of?
I mean, so much. One is just like having the cojones to put yourself in the fight. I think like Brene Brown talked about that in her leadership book about, excuse me, like being on the sidelines versus being in the fight. So, at a certain point, like deciding to do something big like that, you're putting yourself in the fight, and it's scary to be like, other people are looking at you and what you're doing and how you're doing it. But it's also like, they don't have a say in what you're doing and how you're doing it. You're the one in the fight. So putting yourself on the start line is a huge thing to be proud of. And then doing the work to get there, because, it is a serious financial investment to put yourself over to Europe, right? To get your bike to Europe, to get all your equipment to Europe, then to have the hotel room and pay for the food and pay for the entries. And it's like, okay, I've invested a lot in this thing. And then after you think like, what the hell am I doing with my life? You're like, okay, I'm here. Like, I'm not going to F it up. And so it really helps you narrow down like what matters when it comes to putting, like, once you put yourself in the fight, you're just going to focus on what matters to get you to your goal the best you can. So I'm not going to care what other people are saying or about how I train or what I'm doing. I'm only going to focus on like how I'm doing, right? So, and how I can control how I do is, do I put in the work day in and day out? Do I show up when I say I'm going to show up? If I have an obstacle, how am I going to get around that? And, sometimes it's reconfiguring your week to make sure that you get both strength trainings in, plus the hard, fast workout. Sometimes it's figuring out how to race with a sinus infection. So those sorts of, obstacles are, I think, putting yourself on the line is something that rarely people choose to do. That there's not a lot of people who go, let me do the hardest thing possible. A lot of people really enjoy, showing up to a cycling event and then just doing it. And I'm one of those people. I love just doing it, but I really also love the testing yourself to see how the best you can be. So in the middle of the event, like there's definitely a point where you look around and you're like, there's all these people from all over the world. And you're like, all of us are here putting yourself in the fire. There's definitely a wide array of personalities. And you can imagine like you've got the kind of the very type A of the type A are there and they let you know it. So it's, managing those personalities and not letting them get to you and just staying in your zone, in your lane, focusing on you, being really selfish and being okay with that during that week and just knowing what you need to do versus worrying about what everybody else is doing. So that is, I think, one of the hardest things as a person who's not inherently selfish to do when you get into a big event like that is putting on the blinders and saying, okay, I've invested all this to be here. I need to follow it through. And then having a moment in the middle where you're just like, I am here doing the damn thing. Holy shit. I did the work. I got here. It's happening. It's tempting to run away from those feelings of like, your feet are on the fire. It's time to do it. A lot of people just run away and hide. It's too much, right? You feel the stress of the event and it's too much. And so I was recognizing that I was like having those thoughts of, why am I here? What am I doing? This is ridiculous. These people are annoying me, and being like, no, actually you're here to like do the best that you can do for you and test yourself against the very best, which is what you wanted to do. So remembering why you're there and not letting the stress of the event get to you, and maybe even thriving on that stress, is another like mindset push, I think. So as I was like, this is the moment, this is the week you've been training for the last 2 years. It's all come to this. And, on one hand, I was sick. So I was like, God damn, this is the worst timing ever. Everything sucks. But only I can control how I think about things. So instead of being really down about it, I was down about it, but instead of wallowing in it, it was really more of like, well, what kind of drugs can I take to make myself feel better and not get, popped if I go drug tested, right? Sudafed's not on the list. You can't have that. But there's a lot of other opportunities out there. So I learned all about the World Anti-Doping, and what you can take as far as cold medications. So it was a great opportunity to learn. And then towards the end of the event, I had a couple of days left, and it was, I was embracing like, just relax, let the energy fuel you and not be worried and like fighting the energy of the stress of the event, letting it fuel you. I really believe too, I think this is just from a lifetime of being a competitive athlete, but I refuse to let nerves like get to me. I really focused on, when I did start to feel nervous, on flipping the script and being like, how can I use this energy for good? And so I was really hypervigilant on visualizing what I wanted to happen and letting my brain do the rest of that work. So that energy that I was feeling, I was just trying to funnel into my nervous system. Like, do your thing, brain, make sure I have a great race. Like, let's do it. So having these tricks is really important. A lot of races I have ruined by being too nervous or too concerned about what was going on around me, instead of really just focusing on my own anxiety, like funneling my own anxieties about the race into a positive way. So, and I remember in the race, with like, I don't know, 4 laps to go or something, and I was still in it, and I was like, I might be placing 3rd, this would be amazing. And then I was like, you got nothing to hold back anymore. Like, you should just go all in. And like, are you going all in? I had these thoughts while I was riding around like 35 miles an hour around this track, and then being like, don't run into anyone. But it was also like, you got nothing left. There's nothing to hold back for. And I think sometimes you have to ask yourself, like, are you going all in? Whether it's a training or your work or your race, like, there's nothing to hold back for. So, with that, it was like, I had that extra confidence of like, I have a lot left. I could totally go a lot harder, and that made all the difference. Like, because I said that to myself, I came around, I think right before the finish line, I came around the 2nd place rider to take 2nd in the overall race, like in the final sprint. Yep. And that made the difference to getting 2nd versus 3rd in the race. So it does matter. You do want to go all in. And the biggest lesson is, I wish I would have gone all in from the beginning instead of being like holding back. And that is also, a newbie position where you're like, it's my first time doing this. I don't really know what I'm doing. Where am I? How am I doing? All of those, I don't know, what do you call them? Like, not quite imposter syndrome, but more of just like, I just want to see how this all plays out, and then I'll get into it. So I think I wrote in my write up, just like, after the first sprint, I had ended up on the wrong side of a split, and something in that effort of like pushing back to the front I got right into the flow and was like, I need to, pick this up. And it did. So it was letting my body just do what I know how to do without overthinking it. Wow. So if you've done 17,000 cross races, you don't have to think about it. You just do it, So I have raced this is my 16th season of racing. And though I'm still relatively new to track racing, all of that road racing experience, I don't have to think about it. I just know how to race at this point. So, and yeah, I made a ton of mistakes still, but I wish I would have started from the second lap, like going all in. Don't hold back. But you don't know what you don't know until you finish the race. And then you can always coulda, shoulda, woulda. So lots of lessons learned from the whole week and lots of lessons learned from that race. But I love that. And I'm proud that I put my feet in the fire and I had to overcome several adverse moments. And then I just went all in.
Wow. I just want to say that I've learned a whole lot more about how to deal with life than just racing from everything you just said. There's like major life lessons and all of that. So thank you for that. I'm going to wrap this up with my last question. And that question is, you asked me to ask you about cadence.
Mm-hmm.
So
there's a story. I haven't told anyone yet. I think only Annabelle knows, my coach. I probably put in, I don't know, if you were to look at the last 2 years, I'm willing to say I put in 100 hours of cadence drills. And I'm probably not that far off. But I mean, hours and hours of just practicing pedaling. And you're like, really? I get this all the time for cyclists. Like, really, I need to do more. I'm like, so yeah, because I was a road racer and I mean, 93 RPMs is my very favorite RPM. It's just what my body likes, but that is too slow for track. So in the scratch race where I was sick and I learned after the race, I was severely undergeared. In the last 3 minutes of that race, averaged 120 RPMs for 3 minutes straight.
Whoa.
So if I had not done 100 hours of cadence drills, I would not have even had the ability to stay in the race. And I think I was like 5th or 6th. It was not a high placing, but I would have been lapped because my feet didn't know how to go that fast. So that I've never had to do anything that hard in my life. Like, that was so hard. 120 for me is hard. But yeah, I've achieved now. I feel like a track racer because I can ride at 110 RPMs and then sprint off of that. So I feel like I've arrived. But just all y'all out there who roll your eyes at me about doing your cadence drills, it's so important because you never know when you're going to need to rely on fast cadence. And as a quick primer for everybody asked me this, like, why do I care? But going fast or being, riding strong is a combination of fast feet and how hard you can push that gear. So yeah, if only I had been on a bigger gear with 120 RPMs, I would have been a 1, 2, or 3 place instead of 4, 5, or 6. So yeah, but that was a huge lesson in preparing, I guess. So yeah, that was a huge aha.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, it was just a huge payoff for something you didn't even know you were going to end up being paid off for. It was just all that hard work came out when you least expected it and was there for you, which is amazing. I was in a spin class yesterday, and let me just tell you, I have nothing but props for you when you just said that, because that's the whole thing there. It's like, oh, let's spin like a little hamster and get as fast as we can go, and then let's sprint on top of it out of the saddle. And it's like, what is this? So congrats to you. Anyway, thank you so very much for your time today and for being so open and honest and vulnerable with us and telling us all of the wisdom that you've learned from this experience. And if there's anyone out there that is on the fence about getting a coach who has real life experience, who's legit, who understands psychologically what's going on, as well as physiologically what's going on, I think we can all sit here and say that there's no one finer for our audience, as well as other athletes, than Marissa.
Yay!
So thank you so much. What a wonderful experience. We really appreciate you. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah. So, and I know, like, as to Julie's point right there, like, if anyone is, looking at big, hairy goals for next year, it's important to get started now in the preseason, right now. Yeah. And so we have an apply to work with us in the comments below. And then Maddie was always like, hey, reminder, but I am supposed to tell you a reminder. We have a workshop coming up, which is all about planning your peak performance. And I know that there are some of you out here who are like, I love what you're saying. I just don't have the dollars to invest in coaching right now. So I want to help you, I want to help you step through how to plan for that peak performance. Like what steps did I take 2 years ago to plan for that special week in the end of September? So we're going to go through the full planning your peak performance. So you walk away from that workshop knowing exactly what your goals are, how you're going to start to get there. You'll have specific like strength training and intervals trainings type things that you can apply just right away. So we want you to come. It's on the 2nd, but you don't have to go live. It'll be you'll have lifetime access to it in what I call it a mini course. So in our course area. I love it. So I'd love to see you all there. We have about 18 spots remaining. So we'd love to have you there. Any final thoughts, Julie, as we wrap it up?
Thank you. I've learned so much in this conversation about dealing with adversity, dealing with nerves, dealing with all of that talk that we get in our heads, the stuff we should listen to, the stuff we shouldn't listen to, because we all do it in every aspect of our life. So thank you. It was great.
I know. I didn't mention, I know years ago though, worked with a sports psychologist for that reason. Like I'm definitely what do you call it? Like a finished product of all of these things that I've taken over the years. So it's kind of cool to think about. Well, in the future, we can do more chats about nerves or sports psychology or how cycling is just like life and you got to go all in.
I love it. Let's do it. It sounds good.
All right. Thanks for speaking with us, y'all. I know Cherie was here, so thanks, Cherie.
Thanks,
Good to
Cherie.
see you.
All right, you guys. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.